are going to start talking about dynamic admission, moving to beta, and then an item that I don't recognize, looks like MEDI for Open API. So Chow, I know you've got some docs and some thoughts. It looks like you had incorporated several items into your doc. You want to talk about it?
So we initially.
Chow?
Can you hear me?
Chow, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, very, very faintly. Can you move closer to the mic?
All right. So we. How about now?
Yes, I can hear you.
So we initially planned to push initializers to beta, but after comparing the webhooks and initializers and study all the use cases, we find out webhooks will solve most of our use cases, and actually it's a better fit for some cases. Also, we think for webhooks we will have less problems than initializers facing. I mean, in regards with regarding how to integrate.
Chow, you're fading again.
I'm saying we think webhook is a better fit for our current use cases, and we expect there will be less problems integrating webhooks with the rest of the system. So we want to push webhook to 2.0, and we shared the doc yesterday on the plans pushing webhooks to beta. So I mean,
it looked like you've gotten most of the input, or you've gotten a lot of input from issue 1137, I think it was, or we had talked about some of the use cases for both and what it would take to get them to beta, and you had distilled it down to what we needed for webhook admission. Do you want to talk about the difference in flow? Because I saw you had from that other doc the idea of mutators and validators.
I mean, I think we want all mutations to happen before we want all things that modify things to happen before things that verify things. That way, if you want to be absolutely sure that certain types of objects aren't allowed in your system, you can write that just as a validator. And some types of things will need to be split into registering both a mutating and a validating webhook, but it can be the same backend or with like a slightly different resource path.
Yes, so I like the split. I think that I had two substantive comments on the doc. One was about conversion, and I think that we're roughly agreeing with each other that we don't want to touch an object unnecessarily. We have to be careful about converting, and then for mutators, they're going to have to send back patches so they can reliably not strip fields, which I think was mentioned in your doc. And then the other comment I had is that I would actually like to see probably just one. I don't think I need to see all of them, but I think I'd like to see at least one substantive admission plugin split to do separate mutation and validation. We have a couple choices. There's the limit verifier, and I think the better choice is probably PSP. But like I said, I don't need to do all of them.
You just want one, like a PR that doesn't necessarily get merged, but we're convinced would work, or are you looking to have it really get moved out in one night?
I'd really like to establish the pattern. I am, and I think it fits with Chow's doc that he would still be able to have the flow. And once we have one as a pattern, it'll probably be easier to move others. We can talk about a pull first if you want.
Wasn't there an open PR for this for pod security policy already?
Jordan had started one. I don't know if he completed the split. So, I mean, that's why that, and it's an important one. It's one we care about. not that I doubt that we're right. I think we're all agreeing that it's a good idea to split these two phases. But actually seeing it work.
I think with the short schedule we have for this quarter, and there's gonna be a lot of like cluster installer changes. If we now have effectively a new component and security reviews, I can't.
Oh no, sorry, you misunderstood. No, not actually making it separate as a separate webhook, but just prove that the two stages can work. Right, like right now we don't have separate stages, right? So in tree, keep it static, keep it compiled in. That's fine.
That seems very doable. I think does anyone have see that as being an issue? We already have to change the command line flag. So.
But how do we run the compiled in plugins?
The pod security policy will be split into two static ones: pod security policy mutator and pod security policy validator, and then they'll be moved to different positions in the recommended command line, and they may share like internal cache data structure when they're constructed. Does that sound fine?
So David, my computer is being used to capture the video here. Could you please drop the link to the doc in here and possibly project it?
Sorry, you're really quiet. I think Mehdi just linked to Chow's doc.
Tab. If you could just shift over to that tab. I'm not.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
I'm not sure everyone in this meeting got the link and understands what we're talking about. So that was.
It's a big doc. I don't think we can.
No, I understand. I was just gonna.
The summary tab, if you could project that, so people could at least see.
Yeah, there we go.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that the doc was very comprehensive. I thought it took input from, I don't know, we had maybe 3 or 4 different issues and polls describing different things we wanted for beta. I'm happy with this doc. If we got all this in, I think calling it beta for admission webhooks is very reasonable.
The one gap I think there is, so out of everything in here, the failure mode bootstrapping problem has the least design. So we don't have to talk about it here, but I think that one needs a follow-up discussion where we go through and hash out the different options.
Chow had an option listed for having exempted namespaces.
Yeah, I want to talk more about it. It may be the right thing to do. I want to talk more about it.
Okay.
On that early on in the cycle.
Yeah, I don't know. We may not actually have to fix some part of it, but just we should, at least 3 or 4 people should be able to sit down, walk through the entire flow and say, this isn't going to make Cube worse. I think the analogy here is the long discussion we had about API aggregation was a fundamental change to the stability of the system, and so we spent a little bit of extra time on it. It's the same thing.
Okay. I'm okay with that, but I think the plan that Chow laid out is worth starting to execute on.
I don't think it blocks this.
Okay,
it does not block the rest of the plan. It is, we need to be able to answer that before the end of the release, and if we need to add something, let's try to have that discussion in the next week or 2.
Okay. So Chow, development plan approved. Also, I really liked your doc.
Erica won't talk about it.
Chow was it was a collaboration.
All right. So next item is Mehdi, Kubernetes Open API Endpoint. And I don't know that I didn't review ahead of time.
Can you hear us? Hello, can you hear us?
Hey, yes, I think we can hear you.
We changed the mic. I hope this is better.
Yeah, it's a little better.
Okay, so basically I shared it today. I didn't realize that I didn't share this publicly, but it was discussed before, I guess, with some folks in the SIG API Machinery channel, if I remember correctly. It's nothing big, but I will give you guys time to look at it and comment on it if you have any comments. But how our new member is going to work on this, it's just getting rid of the other OpenAPI Swagger endpoints we have. We have swagger.json, swagger.json.jz, swagger.json.pd.jz. All of those will go away. We'll have OpenAPI _v2. and we would set accept and accept encoding on headers to get what we want from that endpoint. That's just basically what it is. I will not mark it as approved. I don't want it to be approved in this meeting, but we'll give you guys time to look at it because I forgot to share it actually before I'm in public. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would like a chance to read through it in a little more detail.
Sure.
I do like the idea of trying to stop the proliferation of different variations on the, I don't remember if it was Swagger or OpenAPI, but limiting the number of variations on it and then using, looks like you're going to use accept headers here. That seems pretty reasonable.
Mm-hmm. It even lets clients like try for a kind of API they'd like to get and maybe get like a different one back if we don't implement the one they ask for. Like the notion is that it's pluggable with accept headers.
Okay.
I like it.
Yeah, we actually did this for one of the zip protocols, didn't we? I remember commenting on someone's poll.
You mean for OpenAPI or?
Yeah.
I think that the accept encoding is in place right now. So even though we have the .jz endpoint, we don't need to use it. The Swagger.json, all of the endpoints, Swagger, OpenAPI endpoint support accept encoding.
Okay. Yeah, I think I like it in concept. I want to read through and then read through all the comments.
Sure. Yeah, no, I look at it. I think. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Looks like it was a relatively light agenda today. Does anyone have anything else they want to talk to, or are we all going to get back to moving dynamic emission to beta? Because that's definitely going to be our big thing this release.
So one note, they're moving API chunking to beta. There are various discussions. Nobody disagreed at any point. The enablement is merged. There's a few usability user interface changes to make. If anybody has any additional comments on chunking, we're going to go through the performance tests with it, even though it doesn't get fully expressed. If anyone has any feedback on that post merge, that would be the time to do it in the next week or so.
SIG scalability should have had something to say there.
Yeah, it was basically Wojtek signed off right away, and then we've had several discussions on this through various folks in the SIG. I just want to make sure that if anybody was surprised by this, that they speak up.
Can I put in a last request that we use the word pagination instead of chunking, which sounds like content transfer encoding chunks, and these are usually called paginated APIs. I just feel like every time I hear that.
We originally called it paging, and then in the proposal there was a lot of confusion because people thought this was pagination focused on end user pagination, and so the proposal currently says chunking to distinguish because we're not trying right now to solve I'm an end user going to a web UI and just clicking through stuff. So we can change the naming in the docs. We don't explicitly call it paging or chunking except in code. And in code, we're leaning a little bit towards paging in the client-facing APIs. But the docs and so forth try to be, this allows you to get the API back in chunks rather than calling it chunking, for instance.
Okay.
Yeah, the name, this is Matt Farina, the name chunking, when I heard that, I really wasn't paying that much attention to it, mostly because I thought we were talking about content chunking. And
well, it is content chunking technically, right?
So it's breaking the chunks of content. So it's not pagination?
It is, you get one huge list in chunks.
So one request gets everything.
Yeah. One request gets everything. And then you can say, I want to get parts of this very large request, which is a consistent. Like the difference here is that paging usually isn't consistent, right? So you're on the first page of a web UI, you come back 30 minutes later, you click next page. That's not what this is. This is the same way that I can list all 500,000 pods in the system. I can make that same request consistently and get 500 at a time within a certain window, so that I can build an initial cache to then watch for changes from.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's somewhat of a subtle distinction. Everybody was getting confused by calling it paging, and
Both names are confusing in different ways.
Just call them punks. It's a gigantic chunk. Call them punks.
Punks. I like.
yeah, the client Go calls it enabled paging because to a client Go it looks like paging. They don't really care. We may want to. We'll probably at some point add things that look more like paging, and we don't want to prohibit that or preclude that.
As long as it's documented well, somebody will figure it out. But
yeah, anybody who's
This is confusing.
concerned about this, go read the API doc description and complain about it, and then we'll fix it if it's not clear. Specifically, the limit and continue fields on object metadata.
Thanks.
So a different topic. This is Stu. I wanted to revisit the notion of user API servers and specifically storage. Last week, last 2 weeks ago, the assertion was made that there was no time or no manpower for pursuing a etcd-like API within Kubernetes, and the advice given was to basically use our own etcd server. Was just curious about the possibility or the reasonableness of using the etcd server that actually is with Kubernetes. The logic there being that, as a API server, Kubernetes is going to have mechanisms in place for itself as the API servers are being split out into multiple chunks. Is it reasonable in general for third-party servers to also use that same mechanism?
It's going to make it a lot more confusing to understand the security of the secrets stored in the API server and the integrity of that data. So you better have a pretty high level of trust in whatever is sharing access to etcd.
And one of the things that we did talk about last week was the possibility of making it easy for you to go get subsets of, like, to get a credential that lets you talk to etcd and view a subset of keys. Is something that someone could build and would probably be would be beneficial to a number of people who would like to continue to use the central etcd server, as long as people were willing to live with the trade-offs of not having quota.
That one is probably the most interesting to me. Right today, it's already possible to reuse etcd if you're willing to share the right key, and if someone spent the time to build a proxy, and I think etcd provides one.
You don't even really need a proxy. You could just generate a secret that has the etcd auth token in it that lets you talk with those credentials to etcd.
I would discourage that heavily. I think.
Who's this? I can't hear who that is.
It's Jago. I'm really uncomfortable with user API servers sharing a system API server.
So when you say user, what user do you mean, and what user does Stu mean?
I mean some third-party extension of Kubernetes that extending the API surface, mostly due to blast radius and potential for corruption.
It's already pretty trusted. I mean, I think there are a lot of use cases that can be satisfied by someone who owns the cluster deciding to add an API server, which is a trusted entity, and saying you can use the etcd here.
Well, there's permissions, and then there's software fault isolation. And I think he's talking more about the latter. Software fault isolation is like, yeah, I trust this guy to see my data, but still, let's not have so many things accessing one resource that they're going to blow it up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable thing. It's also, okay, well, then what's the alternative is creating lots and lots of etcd servers. And so then those each individually fail. And if anything else in the entire cluster depends on one of those failing, then the whole cluster goes down and you didn't actually get fault isolation. So, operationally, I think you're right. There is a trade-off there. Honestly, OpenShift, when we do aggregated API servers, we're going to share the same etcd. It's not worth it operationally. We're going to ship aggregated API servers that reuse the central etcd with some security isolation because it's just not worth it. It's not worth it to blow up people's clusters the other direction. So that's more things
I think that's reasonable given that you're shipping an entire product that's tested end to end all together. I think
one end of the spectrum.
Different, which is that an extension, add-on provided by a third party that an operator installs into their own cluster is then using the same etcd and wasn't validated together with the rest of the system.
Sure.
And therefore make Kubernetes stop working in a way that makes it unrecoverable for an end user.
Well, by analogy, right, you run an etcd operator. If the etcd operator stops working, then anything built on the etcd operator also stops working. So maybe
or admission webhook. I mean,
the admission webhooks are actually the example I think that's really relevant right now is, right, the controller manager goes down, it comes back up until it's self-hosted and it doesn't come back up because an admission hook failed closed. So maybe what we need to do is actually take the previous doc and add some of the trade-offs, like you're saying, like we recommend that if you're talking about end user facing, is this something that you trust as much as the Kubernetes development project? Is it something that you rely on, and if it goes down, the entire cluster stops working, and help kind of separate out these use cases?
Yeah, I think giving good guidance is going to be really helpful for people here. One thing we've seen operationally is because etcd runs everything through a central log, sometimes two things that individually would have run fine on separate clusters when combined have nonlinear effects and bring the system to its knees. So if you haven't tested things together, there's really no way of knowing if two independent use cases that would have worked fine on separate etcd instances will work fine together. So I think giving people really good guidance on keeping things separate when you can, and what to watch out for if you think you're going to combine them, and how to test those would be really useful.
So are you saying like there's a big etcd lock kind of analog to the big kernel lock?
Yeah, I mean,
and like it doesn't scale as you keep adding more and more things using that lock?
It depends on what the workloads are. Since everything's going through a single consensus log for all major operations, sometimes a heavy write load in one workload and a heavy read load in another workload would have worked fine on separate etcd instances, and then when you combine those together, they don't play nice.
Yeah.
You can get a system that gets completely backed up.
There's no way to if it's a third-party component, there's no way to performance test it and then provide some assurances to people you're selling software or support to that when they add something, it'll run well.
Yeah, and I think this is the what level is the thing that's trying to do API aggregation? I mean, we've always said CRDs. Like a CRD controller can blow up etcd and know differently. And so we'll start getting the question of should CRD run against a separate etcd server as well. And that's been raised in the past by David and others.
Yeah, and I think Daniel put together the doc saying, yes, our guidance today is to use your own etcd and etcd operator, mostly because there are so many big questions that the alternative was to provide a not entirely thought through solution, and we didn't want to manage that. Right?
Well, and it's a really good point. There's actually nothing in Kubernetes today that prevents the cluster going down from someone forgetting to do some sort of control. Like more clusters fail because people forget to clean everything up than almost any other mechanism I know of. So we're kind of we probably have the general issue of we need to get a little bit better at unbounded growth before we really worry about the addition of other things. Like most of the things in the core Kube API are somewhat interdependent, where it's hard to reason about how they fail independently. The mission plugins are going to be the exact same way. A sufficiently well-used CRD or aggregated API has the exact same problem. We definitely want to limit blast radius, but we're not doing a great job of limiting blast radius even on the core API today.
Yeah, and we also want people that are not experts on etcd to have predictable behavior. So, if we're able to isolate things, then it's the system will fail in a much more predictable and obvious way. Whereas if you combine the use cases, the error you might see might have been telescoped from one system into a visible error in another system, and tracing it back to the original cause is very indirect.
Yeah. Events is a great example of we were already blowing ourselves up. It was the first one. We've already talked about the remediation. We probably need to get a little bit more serious in 110 and 111 about the mentality that prevents some of that that space from getting worse.
Mhm.
Also, even if we do test that two things work together now, when something's upgraded, its read and write behavior patterns can change
dramatically.
And
Yeah.
things where the data's all in one etcd and it's no longer working, and you have to migrate one of them out.
So I want to add that in terms of the run your own etcd, like I think there's a bunch of low-hanging fruit in improving the etcd operator. And I know the SIG apps folks at Google at least would like to spend some time making that better. So I think we should try to improve etcd operator and kind of revisit in a quarter how we all feel about this and see what people's feelings are on that.
Yeah, and CoreOS is doubling down on etcd right now. There's putting a lot of effort on it, so I think it would be very interesting.
Well, even some level of, we did this for events, which is we made it possible to split out etcd. It's possible that we should just make it really easy to run parallel ones on the same masters. Yeah, they have correlated failure domain, but in terms of if isolation, because again, like a lot of the resources that might be critical to a cluster, there might only be 20 of them, right? So it really doesn't even matter. Like if you have 20 resources and one of them does go haywire, brings down the rest of the cluster, that's bad. But if the cluster is dependent on those 20 resources, you really want to get everybody in a pattern where they feel comfortable. Like they want the highest reliability for those resources, and some pattern that we recommend, whether it's running separate etcds, but running them, for instance, in an HA setup alongside each other with quotas place, for instance.
Like a node selector for master nodes or something like that.
Yeah,
exactly.
I'd be happy to help work on that guidance too. I think it'd be really valuable.
Does that answer the question, Stu?
Yeah, so what I heard was a reluctant admission that it's possible to do this with all sorts of caveats about the consequences of doing so.
That's correct.
Right.
With caution.
Yes, with caution. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of interest in providing the community with guidance so they can understand what we understand.
Yeah, and an assurance that we will make the solution you don't like better in the future.
I have a question about, is anybody actually going to follow up and add a little clarification to the document that Daniel wrote a week or two ago? I thought I heard that as an action item.
So it's more decision-like?
So like you could do it, but think about these things. Think about these things.
And we had said we would do that on the first time we went through the document, so.
I'll go ahead and tag myself there. Yes, I intended to. There's
Okay.
a comment here. Let's see, there's an assignment button here somewhere, right?
Awesome. Just checking. Thanks.
Yeah. There we go. So, I can describe it. There's definitely a spectrum of how much you trust the things and how much you're willing to take in terms of risks to be able to have, easier backup restore stories, that kind of thing. So.
Dave, will you just send a mail to the list when you do that so we can all see if we can think of, come up with one last one or whatever?
Sure. I'm not sure I can do anything other than suggest inside of Daniel's doc. So it'll be a suggestion block.
Okay.
Yeah, that's be fine.
Try to get that sorted out soon.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else have an item they want to add? Okay, look at that. Without Daniel, we can finish like 30 minutes early. And that was hopefully he doesn't watch the recordings. But, all right, Chow, if you need some review for the beta or the webhooks to beta, tag me and bug me on Slack. And I know Polynomial is doing some work as well. So I'll see you guys online.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, guys.